Let's get started. So, welcome to the Agile Strategy Meetup group, where Simon, it's a real pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
I only recently got to know about your mapping. It was Eric Schoen who introduced it to me. Of course, I had heard about it, but I hadn't really been conscious around it. And I've always been curious about what's your take on the topic of strategy, meaning like how do you see that topic developing? And by the nature of the group, which is targeted at agile people who are curious about strategy, but probably doesn't have a lot of experiences in it, we're also very curious to hear, do you have any good advice for us as a new, newborn wannabe strategist, something we can take with us? So with that, very warmly welcome. We look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'm going to have to ask, how many of you know my mapping and use my mapping? More importantly, how many use? One,
Uh,
two, a little bit, a little bit. So, how many of you is it completely new to? Okay. Okay. So what I've got is a presentation. I was at Uradev. Is that how you say Uradev? Uradev? Is that? I hope that's the correct way. And so I did a talk about mapping, how I got into mapping, um, and then I talked a little bit about changes in technology, AI in particular. Then I used that to get into areas of what's changing in coding and then talked about cultural and sovereignty aspects. So I've got that presentation, so I brought that along, and I thought we could use that as a base. And as we go along, if there's certain points that I'll talk about how you can change the environment to your favor. So that's where, and I'll talk a little bit about the strategy side. And of course, if you want to ask questions as we go along, you want to interrupt, please do. Just raise a hand or just shout out. I'm perfectly happy with that. Does that sound all right? Good. Okay, I'm glad because that's the only one I brought. So let me share my screen. Can you see it says crossing the river by feeling the stones? Okay, if you've seen some of this stuff beforehand, there will be a little bit of repetition. My apologies. I'm going to start by just saying something about myself. All the work you're going to see is Creative Commons. I made mapping Creative Commons back in 2005. That's my email address if you ever need to get in contact with me. I work with all sorts of different organizations, including a group called Think, where we're looking at rewilding software engineering. So, in particular, the legacy issue and the fact that most of the approaches, particularly with AI, as far as we're concerned, going up the wrong path. There is a better way of actually focusing on building tools. And another group called eSynergy, which spends a lot of time trying to prove or demonstrate the value of what it's created. That sounds like really easy stuff, but we're notoriously poor in our industry at identifying. We love to talk about value, but we're pretty dreadful at identifying what do we mean by that, and actually do we create any. So that's a bit about me. What I'm going to go through is I'll go through my origin story, how I got into the subject of mapping, what a map is, what it isn't. Then we'll talk about patterns. And so there's some basic patterns like climatic patterns or economic patterns and patterns of change, which brings me on to the subject of change. Then I'll talk about the AI space. Then I'm going to get into architecture. Um, the reason for that is we're going through this wonderful time of specification driven development and ideas that agile's over and all the rest of it. So I want to talk a little bit about architecture and what's actually changing in coding. And then if we have time, I'll get into culture and sovereignty and show you the real horror show that's going on. Okay, so that's my path. How far we get depends upon how quickly I speak and how many questions we have. So, origin story. This all started for me back in 2004, 2005. I was working with this company called Tango. We'd adopted extreme programming. I know Kent Beck, and so we'd adopted it back in 1999, slightly before the Agile Manifesto came out. We discovered it doesn't work everywhere. That was pretty quick. We were very profitable. We had 16 lines of business, 10 million odd users, but we did have one huge problem. And that problem was our CEO. Our CEO was completely clueless. They didn't know what they were doing. They were making stuff up as they went along. They used to come up with statements like this: our strategy is customer focused. We will lead an innovative effort in the market through our use of agile techniques and open source, which I know they'd pinched from another company and just changed a few words. That's how absolutely hopeless our CEO was. And I know this because I was the CEO. So I used to, we were profitable and all the rest of it, but I had no idea what I was doing. So I ended up reading pretty much every book I could find on strategy. None of them helped me whatsoever. And I then ended up in a bookshop in Charing Cross in London. And I was talking to the bookseller, and they asked me, had I ever read Sun Tzu's The Art of War? And I hadn't. And she was a very good bookseller. She persuaded me to buy two different versions of the book because they're all translations. And I'm really grateful for that because it was in the reading the second version I noticed a particular pattern. So Sun Tzu talked about five factors that mattered in competition. And competition, by the way, competition comes from compiter. So it's the act of groups of people seeking or striving for something. And the way we can do that, so comes with and pater is to strive to seek. And the way we can do competition is, well, there's three basic forms. We can either do it by fighting others, so we call that conflict, working with others, so we call that collaboration, or helping others, so we call that cooperation. So when you think about competition, there are three basic forms: conflict, collaboration, cooperation. We normally do all of those at the same time. We'll often collaborate with one group to conflict with another, or something along those lines. But when it came to competition, the five factors that mattered were purpose, number one, have a moral imperative to do something. Number two, understand your landscape, the climate, the environment that you're actually operating in. Then understand the climatic patterns. So this is the weather, the heavens, how the landscape is changing. And then you get into principles, so how you organize and structure yourself, the collection of which we call doctrine. And finally, you get into leadership and gameplay. So this is the bits where you learn to manipulate the space to your favor. So there are basically five important factors that mattered in competition. And at the same time, I came across the work of John Boyd. Does anybody, have you heard of John Boyd? No, a US Air Force pilot, famous for coming up with something called the OODA loop, heavily used in political circles as well as military. So the first O of the OODA loop is to observe the environment. That's what landscape and climatic patterns are about. Observe the space you're operating in and how it's changing. Then you orientate yourself around that, and that's what principles are for. Then you need to decide where to act, and then you act. Okay? And
Simon, I have
because,
a question on that,
yes,
if I may.
of
So
course.
I was reading this in your publications, and I was wondering, this OODA loop looks to me to be very tactical rather than strategical. Do you say, well, but it's the same and it's just a matter of the time frame you are looking at, or how
Yeah.
do you think about that?
Oh, that's really interesting. I mean, particular moves that might make in a particular space are part of a grander strategy. So I might make some tactical choices over here to benefit a wider strategy that I might have. I think the principles, remember that the real strategic gameplay, the stratagems, are in this leadership, decide, and act part. So how do I manipulate the space to my favor? And that might be at a broad level, or it might be a very, very low level. And so all of them require you to observe your environment or understand the landscape you're going to compete in. I mean, strategy without that sort of understanding is just basically noise. I mean, so do I? Tactics are often, they're used in particular contexts, particular approaches, particular methods, and they are part of an overriding strategy that you're attempting to achieve. And that strategy will be full of stratagems itself. And how you play those, of course, is never fixed. It's never a point A to B, and here's my nice roadmap. It's a bit like your landscape. Your landscape is constantly changing because of your actions, others' actions. And so you can have a sort of direction where you're going. That's our goal. That's our strategy. Here's a whole bunch of stratagems we may use. Here's a whole bunch of tactics which people might use in particular circumstances. But of course, it's adaptive all the way along. It's never fixed. There's the famous quote, something like your plan survives first contact, and that's it. I mean, does that answer the question?
I think I get it. Yeah, I think what you're saying is the pattern is the same, and it's basically happening on different time frames, and it supports each other. That's what I.
So, so the danger is people get into this idea of playbooks. I mean, we certainly have field manuals, and so when circumstances are very well known, very well defined, this is the way you operate against that. These are the sort of methods and techniques that you can use. So there's some, but a lot of the stuff has to be applied to the context itself. And which is why I get very much into this discussion about observe your landscape. The first and most important thing is to understand the landscape you're competing in. It's a bit like playing chess. If you cannot see the board, I mean, you can talk strategy all you want. You can talk about wonderful approaches you might take, but that's going to change according to whatever is happening actually on the board itself. And if you can't see it, I mean, it's just pretty much random.
Okay, I get it. Thank you.
Okay. So this whole thing got me into this issue of how do I understand the landscape that I'm operating in, and which is what got me into maps. So when I say landscape, we normally compete. Well, we're very good at territorial. So we all understand territorial landscapes, geographical landscapes, or what we call environmental landscapes. But we don't just compete over territorial spaces. We compete over economies, technologies, social spaces, political spaces, even legal spaces. And the thing is, all of those have landscapes as well. And I became acutely aware that there was an economic and technological landscape that I'm competing over, and I sort of needed some sort of map. So I first started with military history and counter-territorial maps, and this is probably one of my favorite battles. It's the Battle of Thermopylae. So Themistocles, person in the top left-hand corner, ancient politician, Greek general, they had a problem. The Persians were invading. The Greeks ran as independent city-states, sometimes came together in times of war. And Themistocles decided to block off the Straits of Artemisium, force the Persians along a narrow pass into what's known as the Hot Gates. That literally is what Thermopylae means, Hot Gates, where a small number of troops could defend against a larger force. And there are about 4,000 Greeks in that army, including 300 Spartans. And this is where we get the story of the 300 from. Now, I was fascinated by this map because, we could have a conversation around defending around Thebes, defending around Athens. But here we are. This is our play. This is how we are going to try and take advantage of the environment using Thermopylae as a force multiplier. And so I started to look at how I was making decisions in my organization. I was using something called a SWOT diagram. And so I decided to create a SWOT diagram for that battle. And here it is. Strengths: a well-trained Spartan army, a high level of motivation not to become a Persian slave. Weaknesses: the E4s might stop the Spartans turning up, a truckload of Persians are turning up. Opportunities: get rid of the Persians, get rid of the Spartans. We're Athenian, we actually hate the Spartans. And the threats: the Persians get rid of us, and the Oracle says a really dodgy film might be produced a few thousand years later. And I simply put those next to each other and ask myself the question, what would you use to communicate and determine strategy in battle? So how do I determine what I should do? How do I communicate it to others? Should I use a magic framework or position and movement? And it became pretty obvious to me that I needed to use some sort of position and movement described by a map of the landscape. But what I was using was a magic framework. So I really needed to get a grip on what a map of economic and technological spaces looks like. So I went back to my organization and I said to everybody, send me all your maps. And they did, loads of them. My maps, customer journey maps, business process maps, systems maps. And I took one of the systems maps. This is it here. This is for the online photo service. I looked at it, I took one component CRM and I simply moved it across the screen. And I asked the question, how has this map changed? And the answer is it hasn't. Now that's odd, because if I take a territorial map and I take, I don't know, Copenhagen, for example, and shift it next to Burmarsh in England, which is where I live, that map would have changed. But why hasn't it changed here? Well, all of these maps had one thing in common. None of them were maps. They're all graphs. They're all basically diagrams of nodes and connections. And if you move a component, it doesn't actually change the meaning of a map. To explain the difference, I've got a couple of images for you. The three graphs at the top are three locations in the UK: Nottingham, London, Dover, connected by two roads. The three images at the top are all identical. They're all graphs. The three images at the bottom are all completely different, and they're all maps. Do you see the distinction between them? Shout out.
Crystal clear.
Sure.
Yeah?
Yeah,
Okay.
you have you have the North Cross, or how do you call that?
Yes, a compass. So the distinction between a map and a graph is that in a map, the space has meaning because it's representative of a landscape. So you can't simply move bits without changing the meaning of what you're looking. The three at the top, they're all graphs. And that's everything I had. My business process maps, my mind maps, my systems maps, none of them were maps. They were all graphs. And so that became then my next thing, was how do I turn them into a map? I mean, back then I thought this was the stuff you would learn at MBA schools. I now get dragged up and I teach it a day a year, 2 days a year at various universities, but because it turns out this is not what you learn. So in order to create a map, I need three basic components. I need an anchor, such as magnetic north, position of pieces. This is north, south, east, or west of this, and then consistency of movement. So if I'm going north, I'm going north. If I'm going south, I'm going south. If I've got those three things, I can give space meaning. I create a map. So I started off with my systems graph, and I had to think, what was the anchor going to be? So I chose the users, and I chose business and consumers. I put them at the top of the page. I mean, I could have put shareholders, I could have put regulators, there could be many anchors, that's fine. All right, now what? Well, both of those groups had needs. So the consumers needed online image manipulation, online photo storage. This is what they wanted to use. The business needed to sell prints. It needed money from people subscribing to the website. It sold storage. Okay. So I got anchor connected to some needs. So users connected to needs. Well, it turns out all of those components had needs. Well, the website needed runtime, operating system, compute, and compute needed data center and power. So what I had was a chain of needs. And of course, inside an organization, we call that a value chain. Across an industry, we call it a supply chain. Now, this is still a graph. I've got an anchor at the top, and I've got position described through a chain of needs. So how do I do the movement bit? Well, it turned out that each of these nodes were forms of capital. It didn't matter whether we're talking about physical activities, practice, data, knowledge, even ethical values. They evolve through a common set of patterns. So they start off with the genesis, the first time something appears. Then you get custom emerging examples, then products, rental services, converging examples, and eventually commodity and accepted. So all I had to do was to go through that chain of needs and ask that question, how evolved is this component? And that created my first map, and that was 2005. Now, what I'm doing with this map is I'm exposing to others my assumptions about a space. So why does this matter? I'll give you an example. This is an insurance company. This is about 2011-ish. They needed compute. They would order server. Server would go into goods in. They'd modify mount racket. They had a bottleneck in their business process flow to do with modifying and mounting servers. So they came up with this plan to invest in robotics. Multi-million-dollar investment. They'd spent 6 months working on this. They had an entire business case, return on investment calculations, sub 1 year. They had an entire story that was developed around investing in robotics. And I was asked, what did I think to this? Well, the problem you've got with most organizations is we are story driven. And we tell people that great leaders are great storytellers. So when you challenge somebody's story, you're actually saying to them, I don't think you're a great leader, which means they get very defensive. Executives love challenge, but by that they mean they challenge you, not you challenge them. So faced with this problem, I said, well, I can't challenge their story. They've spent 6 months working on this. Can we map it? We had about 15 minutes of argument about whether to map, and then 15 minutes of mapping. And so this was the map they created. User needs compute. They said compute was a product. Okay. Order server, server goods in. They had all of that as being commodity, including servers. Okay. And rack mount modify. I'll leave that map there. I just one of the beauties about a map is I can look at a map and I can ask questions of it by saying I think there's something wrong with the map without challenging somebody's story, because the map is always wrong. They're always imperfect representations. So I can challenge the map safely. So I'm going to just switch a timer on and I'll put you in that room and ask me a question about the map. Is there anything odd you see with this map? Shout out.
I'm not in that business, but I would be surprised that the rack is a custom thing.
Right, perfect. Okay, that took about 15 seconds. So that was my question. Why have you got racking custom built? And they said, oh, we have custom built racks. Oh, okay. What are the modifications you're making to servers? Well, the servers we buy don't fit our racks. Oh, okay. So we have to take cases off, drill new holes, add new plates in order to get them to fit our racks. Ah, and that's why you need robotics. Yes. About 5 seconds later, somebody in the room just went, why aren't we using standard racks? Now, these people weren't daft. These people were trapped by past narrative. And this is one of the most common problems that I see. Is what people don't realize is everything evolves. If there's supply and demand competition, everything is evolving across the map. It's never static. So at some point in the past, there were no such thing as standard racks. So custom racks made sense, but that had changed. But what they're doing is they're constantly optimizing process flow. And they're never challenging or questioning how evolved the components are. And as soon as, literally it was Well, it was slightly more than the 20 seconds we've taken here. It was probably a couple of minutes. But as soon as that was done, that entire multi-million dollar project just evaporated. Does that make sense? Okay, good. So now I talk about patterns. Most of the patterns I learned from what I call pre-mortem challenge, post-mortem learning. So before I build something, I map it out with the people involved, and we challenge the map. So we get away from custom building racks or whatever it's going to be. And then we go and build something. And then afterwards, we come back to the original map and say, okay, what did we learn? What's changed? And this is how we learn patterns. And there's three basic types of patterns you learn. There's the climatic patterns. These are rules of the game. There's principles. These are universally useful patterns, which you should always apply. And there's stratagems, and they're all context specific. So there's about 30 climatic patterns, 40 principles, about 150 different forms of gameplay. Okay, most people are oblivious to all of this. Now I've snuck a few of the principles in there. Number one, first principle you learn is know your users. Back in 2005, this was like a shock revelation to people. What do you mean we should understand our users? Two, focus on user needs. So you understand who your users are and all your users, not just your consumers, but the business, the shareholders, the regulators as well. Focus on their needs. Then you would know the details, number three. So you understand the supply chain or the value chain. But it's not enough to know that you've got racks in there, for example. You need to understand what's being considered. There's a world of difference between the genesis of penicillin and penicillin as a commodity. Same with racks. Okay, I'll show you another one. This one comes from HS2, High Speed Rail. So James Finley, good friend of mine, he was the CIO at HS2. We needed to build HS2 big heavy engineering project in a virtual world. And the reason for building it in a virtual world, the purpose is quite simple, that if you dig up a virtual world and get it wrong, it's cheaper than digging up the English countryside. So that first of all, let's develop it in a virtual world. That's the systems graph for building HS2 in a virtual world. Now, James's problem was this: how do I manage it? Back in those days, and this is about 2012, the way in government we used to do projects is we'd group them together into, domains that sounded similar, and then we'd outsource them to other parties. So we'd have like lot one engineering-y stuff, lot two user experience, lot three back office, whatever. And we'd outsource, and then we'd have massive cost overruns and failures, and it would always be a disaster. And then we'd repeat the same process for the next project, constantly trying to get specifications better. And James didn't want to do that for this. So he spent Sunday afternoon, he drew a map. He sent me the map and asked, how do I manage this? Now, was easy for me because I'd learnt this lesson about 6 years beforehand, back in 2006. I said I used Agile everywhere. I quickly learnt it doesn't work everywhere. And the reason for this is that on the left-hand side, things are in this chaotic, uncertain, uncharted space, the genesis of novel and new. Doesn't matter whether we're talking about the first radio or penicillin, starts over there. Over time, it becomes industrialized, so more defined, more certain, more widespread. And as its characteristics change, you discover there's no such thing as a one-size-fits-all management method. Doesn't matter whether I'm talking about purchasing or project management or finance. So what we found, or what I found, was Agile, as in extreme programming, in-house development, is very strong on the left because on the left, you're all about reducing the cost of change because change is the norm. On the right-hand side, techniques like Six Sigma, outsourcing, are beneficial because you're about reducing deviation. You don't want deviation with a commodity. And the middle, lean off-the-shelf products because you're all about learning and reducing waste. So what you learn to do is use multiple methods. So the left-hand side, agile techniques, off-the-shelf products. If you're going to build, use something like lean. On the right-hand side, outsource. Or if you're going to build, you start using techniques like Six Sigma. And so one single project, you're going to use multiple different methods all at the same time. There's a world of difference between agile, as in the methodology, which is, using agile, which we're doing here on the left-hand side, and being agile, which means applying appropriate methods. If you try and use XP everywhere, it's as bad as trying to use Six Sigma or SAFe is another classic example where people try and have one method fits everywhere. Doesn't work. I used to be the chaos monkey for their leadership team. I explained it had a context and yet they had to work out what but and like many of these things, it's going to work everywhere. It doesn't. You need to use appropriate methods. It's pretty basic. Okay. If I go back and have a look at a standard contract. So let's go back to the original systems graph, how it was going to be broken up. Let's take lot one engineering and just overlay that on the map. So that we're going to do all these components and outsource them. If I look at that contract, I can tell you that it's going to fail before we've even signed the paperwork. And it's going to fail because the stuff on the right hand we can specify, and the stuff on the left hand side we can't. It's going to change. So whenever we try and stick it in a contract, define what we want, we're going to lead to massive cost overruns. Oops. You often then get into a fight with the vendor. The vendor said, well, it's because you kept on changing your mind on stuff, the stuff on the left, and they can always point to the stuff they delivered efficiently. The problem is you're always going to change your mind. The worst thing that can happen to you is somebody on your own side says, next time we need to specify it better because you can't. You were never able to. So most organizations just about they do okay at understanding their users, not too bad at understanding their user needs. Most of them are failing at understanding the chain, so understanding the details involved, whether it's the value chain, the supply chain. We go through these shocks like Brexit and COVID and Ukraine, and companies are being surprised all the time by how their supply chain is being impacted. Most organizations at best, what we know is one up, one down, who we buy from, who we sell to. Then when we get to understanding, what is being considered, so not just understanding the graph, the supply chain, but how evolved. That's where most organizations fall off a cliff. I mean, they generally have very, very poor understanding in that space. And then most of them are attempting to apply one-size-fits-all methodologies. So I don't know, Safe everywhere or Six Sigma everywhere, whatever it happens to be. And then most of the contract structures are flawed. And you might think to yourself, well, how does any organization survive in competition with others? Well, the good news, everybody else sucks as well. And so as long as everybody's hopeless, then no one gains an advantage. The problem is there are some companies who are better at this stuff, who actually do. And at a national level, if you look at somebody like the Chinese government is spectacular at understanding the details of supply chains. They're really, really good at this. But most organizations are pretty hopeless, but they're competing against others who are hopeless as well. And so you can get away with not having to worry about this stuff until you start coming against those organizations who are slightly better. Then we get on to another set of patterns, which is climatic patterns. But before I do, is this all right, or do you have questions, or do you want me to keep? Because I've already gone
So,
beyond 30 minutes, so I could
no,
stop there.
well, Simon, it's amazing. I enjoy the story. I even had the pleasure to listen to this in Malmö, but
Yeah,
you learn something new every time. But I think it's a good idea maybe to, if it's a good moment, that to pause
always a
and
good
take some
moment. Yeah,
questions. So at least I have one question I have been burning to ask you,
yeah.
and it's down to something you said in Malmö and which you loved, but or which I love, is that you said in the future we will all be testers, and then I mean this came to me that if you look at the upper left corner of Dave Snowden's Cynefin model, it's a little bit about testing your way into the world. So could you actually think of a strategy as a like destructive test case with which you test the world? And sometimes it destructs in your favor, and sometimes it destructs in your disfavor. But in a
Okay.
way, it's through the strategy act. Um,
Hang on, I'm just shooting forward here. I'm just going to go and open something else up. Um, Hang on a minute. Let's
so
have
the
a
question would
look.
be, you say testers, but in
Yeah,
reality, it could be that we are all strategists because we have to write those test cases to go destruct the world in favorable ways.
I think there might be I'm curious by the testing thing because I think I was talking about the difference between testing and development. So very much testing
Oh,
is
I'm definitely
a
bending this my way, but I did
oh
hear you
okay
say it on stage in Malmö.
because testing is very much an engineering subject, whereas development is very much a craft. Do you mean that bit that I was talking about?
Oh, so it wasn't actually connected to any particular part in your speech. For me, it resonated. And if it's
Okay.
completely out of context, let's just leave it behind, but give me this last chance. So
No,
for
no,
me, it
no.
really resonated because when you work with agentic systems, I
Okay.
think it's on your shoulders to test what comes
Oh,
out of them, and it's your responsible that
see.
what comes out is yours.
Yeah.
And then being a
I
big
see.
fan of Dave's work, this probe sense response or
Yeah.
act sense response is in
Yeah.
a way of testing the waters before you dip
Yeah.
in.
All right.
And then the
So,
last thing is that it's about a destructive thing, right? Normally you want tests to be non-destructive, but actually strategy, you would want it to be a destructive test case and hopefully destruct the world in your favor.
okay. So, um, I said there's 150 different ways of different stratagems out there, ways of manipulating a market. Okay. So I'm going to take I'll go back to Fatango. Here's a basic, very simple map. Um, And there are some basic patterns, which we haven't covered, the climactic patterns, such as everything evolves. But what you can do is you can manipulate the space. So when I've got a map, it's a bit like, with a territorial map, deciding to use Thermopylae as a force multiplier. There are ways of changing the map to your favor. So one great stratagem to use is to open source stuff. If you want to drive the industrialization of something, you can use open source to do that. If you want to slow it down, you can use fear, uncertainty, and doubt because we have inertia to change, and we'll cover inertia when I go back to climactic patterns. You can also use constraints, as I say, so you can limit the supply chain in different areas, and that can slow down, or you can release the brakes, and so you can accelerate the rate of competition. But things will evolve regardless, and you can do this up and down the stack. And one of my favorite games is this game. Remember, we're up to one, two, three, four. Well, this is five now of our 150. So this is the IRC game, and it's very simple. You take a product, a pre-existing product, and you turn it into a utility and provide it as a component service to others. So I wrote about this in 2005. And so you take something like compute and you turn it into a utility. And then you expose it through an API. And the reason why you do that is you get everybody else to build on top. So everybody else is acting as your free research and development department. And most of them will build things which are completely useless, but some of them will build things which will rapidly grow. And of course, you have to build them for the underlying consumption of your service. So if you think of compute as a utility, we'll give it a random name, we'll call it EC2. And then other people build, I don't know, Kit and Internet, and some people build big data as a service, or sorry, big data systems. You discover big data is rapidly spreading, so you mine the ecosystem to spot future patterns, which you commoditize to new component services. Now, every time you do that, you harvest the ecosystem. People will go, "Oh, you've eaten my business model," and others will cheer because you've made it easy for them to build new things. So the model is very, very simple. You get everybody else to innovate. Ideally, you kill off all forms of innovation in your organization. And the best way I know of doing this is with something called the press release process. So the press release process is a process of working backwards whereby people write the press release before they build whatever they're going to build. And the reason you use it is it's impossible to write a press release for something which has never been invented before. You can really only write a press release for a pre-existing thing which you're turning into a utility. Write the press release and get it right. So what you're doing is you're getting everybody else to innovate for you. You're mining metadata to spot future patterns. And then what you concentrate on is commoditizing everything to component services. And if you do that, then your apparent rate of innovation, customer focus, efficiency all increase with the size of the ecosystem. And my
Mhm.
friends at Amazon, Jonathan Allen, Thomas Blood, this is AWS's second ever book itself. It has 17 pages of my mapping in there, including the ILC model, because it's a really easy way of chewing up industry after industry. Okay. But this has been going on for 20 years. Of course, there's ways of counterplaying it. Of course, most people have not got a clue. But so if you think about it, you take compute, ignore the date thing, because this was actually a map I did for some friends at Amazon back in 28. You just repeat the same pattern as you go through machine learning engine, machine learning platforms, AI services, and you just what you basically focus on is climbing up the stack. And you can see Amazon doing it with people like with things like Bedrock and all the rest of it as well. It's really good gameplay. Um, the others who are really good at this, China government is fantastic at this. So look, the answer to your question is there's about 150 different ways of manipulating the market to your favor.
Mhm.
Um, the games that you actually play very much depend upon the context, i.e.,
Yeah.
what the map looks like.
Mhm.
So ILC is a favorite one that's been going for 20 years. Companies have successfully used it to chew up industry after industry. I mean, but even more important than the gameplay, let me just go back, is the observation.
Mhm.
Okay, can you see my screen, the climate?
Yeah.
Right,
Yes.
just I need to just explain this. Now, there's about 30 climactic patterns. Again, most people are oblivious, but and these are useful for anticipating change. And that's a critical bit about strategy. So, and I'll explain why. Um, if you think about this is compute roughly in 2005, using these in application, best coding practice, runtime, operating system, best architectural practice on computers, a product. Well, the first pattern you learn is everything evolves. The map is never static. It's constantly moving if there is supply and demand competition. So back in 2005, we knew the compute was going to head towards a utility. I thought it was going to be Google. Turned out it was Amazon the next year. It was friends of mine, Ben Black, who proposed it, and Chris Pinkham and others built it in South Africa. So you learn everything evolves, and as it evolves, it becomes more efficient. But you also learn past success breeds inertia. So if you think of somebody like Blockbuster and Netflix is my favorite example, First with a website, Blockbuster. First with video ordering online, Blockbuster. First with video streaming experiments, Blockbuster. First to go bankrupt, Blockbuster. Netflix was a DVD mail order company. Blockbuster was this highly innovative group. But the problem is, Blockbuster made most of its money from late fees, which depended upon physical stores. So its actual past success is what caused it inertia to streaming. Not lack of innovation, it out-innovated everyone. Then you learn about co-evolution of practice. So as underlying technology changes, the practices change as well. So we end up going from, best architectural practices based upon things like disaster recovery tests, capacity planning, to distributed systems designed for failure, because the underlying compute has gone from what we call high MTTR to low MTTR. Then you learn efficiency enables innovation. And then you learn higher order systems, the adjacent unexplored create new sources of wealth. The next thing you learn is you have no choice over evolution. As things evolve to a utility, efficiency, speed, and new value force you along that path. And that, again, is the Red Queen effect. You're in competition with others. If they get sufficiency, speed, new value, you have to change. And then you learn patterns like Jevons paradox, which comes from the coal question, 1865, where basically people make loads of mistakes. They think this change is going to save them money or enable them to get rid of people. But actually what's going to happen is your entire estate is going to expand because the underlying technology has become more efficient and enables us to do new things. Now, the point about this is I have a line of the present, and then by using those patterns, I can see what's likely to change. And this helps me work out where to invest and also where not to invest. And I use this stuff at Canonical, and who runs Ubuntu. And I ran strategy for Canonical, and we were 3% of the operating system market against Microsoft and Red Hat. And they had all the people, all the billions. We were a tiny group, but we had maps. And within 18 months, cost $500,000, we took 70% of all cloud computing. And Ubuntu still dominates cloud today. So the point about this is understanding your landscape, really, really important to start with, but also applying those patterns of change. So getting an understanding of what is changing, where that landscape is going is also critically important. And once you've got that, it's a bit like you start to learn where you skate to where the hockey puck is going, not where it's been. Once you've got that, then you can start to play games and stratagems. Then you can say, well, given this, let's open source this. Let's maybe use fear, uncertainty, doubt here. Let's use constraints on this part of the map. Maybe we'll run an ILC model. Then you can start playing those sorts of games. But start with number one, observe your environment. Then number two, start to understand how that environment is changing. And then once you get good at that, then you can start playing games.
Yeah. It
Does that
sounds a
make
little bit like,
sense?
absolutely. It sounds like we even have an equivalent of Gilp's rule, meaning that you can always map something in a way that's more useful than not mapping it at all.
All right. So all maps are imperfect representations, even territorial maps. So a perfect map of Malmo would be the size of Malmo. Okay.
Is there
And that's useless as a map. So in order to be useful, it has to be
yeah,
imperfect.
yeah. Is there something that cannot usefully be mapped?
Well, I map cultural systems. I map nation state competition. I map individual lines of business, projects. A friend of mine, Kelsey, mapped himself. Kelsey, as a result, left Mesosphere and ran the Google Kubernetes project, which he's done quite well doing that. So I've mapped everything from space to education to healthcare to sexual identity. I work with different governments in South America on sexual health campaigns. So fairly broad, because at the end of the day, all you're doing is you're asking people to expose their assumptions about an economic or technological, political, or
Mhm.
social space. That's all. Was that helpful?
It's been super helpful. I have one last question, then I think we need to open it up for others.
Yeah.
I suppose I know you know Dave Snowden really relatively well.
I
He's
see Dave every couple of weeks.
there. You go. Estuarine mapping. How does that connect to your mapping? I
Which
mean,
one?
so his Estuarine mapping?
Well,
Probably.
I've been bending Dave's ear for years and years and years about mapping.
Okay.
And so a couple of years ago, I think he came up 3 or 4 years ago, something like that, with S-Drive mapping. And so my viewpoints are, I quite like it. It's a different perspective. I would encourage people to do it.
Thank you. Any other questions for Simon?
I have a question actually. I'm
Yes.
super curious about like so in your maps on your x-axis, you map this like evolution of going from I don't remember like custom to commodity or genesis
Yeah.
to commodity.
Yeah.
Would you say is that the optimal axis, or do you ever experiment with like trying to map out on other axes, like what could also be interesting to look at, kind of?
Yeah, so Genesis Custom Product Commodity, that took 9,223 publications, approximately 1 year of about 70 to 80 hours a week work to come up with 4 labels and the evidence behind it. Let me show you.
Mhm.
So I have gone through hundreds of variations of things which don't work. Um, let's see. Let's see if I've got. Let's just do I have it here? Hang on a minute. So I teach at various places like the LSC and other places. Uh, um, oh, no, I'm doing one on sovereignty there. So hang on. Let me see if I've got an earlier version. Around tweaks, Japan example, gradient. Nope, 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 nope. Might have to go back to see if I've got something here. This is nation state import export ratios between countries. I'm just looking to see if I've got frequency signals. Nope, nope, not that one. Let me. Okay. I might not have it on this machine, but let's go back in time, see if I've got something which will do the job. Oh, boom, boom, boom. I've probably got too many things open. Ah, there we are. Right. Um, okay. So let's just have a look at the axis at the bottom. Um, this actually comes from a piece of work which I published back in 20 years ago, which looked at demand and supply competition and talked about, 4 stages which components went through. Uh, Technically, stage 1, 2, 3, and 4, but that's very boring. Um, but I could use the text analysis, which I used to create this, to give me labels, and hence you get the Genesis custom product commodity instead of stage 1, 2, 3, 4. So what it all stems from, that's not a very good example here. Hang on a minute. I want to find a slightly better. example. Oh, yeah. Okay. We'll go further up. Right. Brilliant. All right. Okay. Right. So maps, really easy to do movement, north, south, east, or west. And the reason why it's really easy to do it is if I'm going from Thermopylae to Thebes, it's unlikely that Thebes is going to move during my journey. Okay. But if my journey took 200 million years, then sure, I might have a problem. Now, when I talk about technology, when we go from like electricity, Parthian battery to Edison, Westinghouse, commodity electricity, that's 1400 years. If I take the Z3 to EC2, that's 60 years. So computing evolved in 60 years. That's not 200 million years, that's in our lifetime. So the problem becomes with maps is that your places can move, the tectonic plates can move. So the only way to do movement is to describe movement through change itself. And so I had this idea that, I'd have my graph and I'd have like Parthian battery, Genesis, and there'd be commodity, and we'll put stuff on this evolution scale. But how do I break that evolution scale down? And then I came across the work of Everett Rogers. Well, I knew of Everett Rogers' work, Diffusion of Innovation, made famous by Geoffrey Moore with his Crossing the Chasm. And he talked about how things diffused over time. And Geoffrey Moore added the chasm. So you had early market mainstream. And I thought this was going to be super simple. All I have to do is find out, what percentage adoption do things change from, say, Genesis to more commodity. Well, that sounded great, but it turned out to be a load of rubbish. So if I ask people who has a mobile phone, everybody had a mobile phone. I say, who thinks it's a commodity? Nobody would agree. I'd ask who has gold bars? Nobody has gold bars. Who thinks that's a commodity? Everybody agrees. So I started to find that none of the data matched. And it didn't match because what's actually happening is as things evolve through multiple waves of diffusion. So you get a phone, a better phone, a better phone, a better phone, a better phone. And the problem is the time and the applicable market are all completely different. So there's no crystal ball. You can't estimate this. So I almost gave up. And then I'd collected all these publications looking at this problem, and I noticed this. We used to have publications like the telephone, how we use it. We'd explain to people how to hold the telephone this way up, not this way up. Or we'd have things like this. This room is equipped with Edison electric light bulb. Do not attempt to light with a match. Well, we don't tell people that now, but we used to. So I started to look at publications. And what happens is, if you look at the frequency of publications, we often talk about the wonder of something, like the wonder of radio, then building construction awareness, operation maintenance, feature differentiation, and eventually we stopped talking about it and we started just simply how are we going to use it, like the Radio Times. And then I used this to create a certainty axis, found a point of stability, went back and found the applicable market at that point of stability, and then mapped back the past for many different activities against axes of ubiquity and certainty. This is what I did back in 2005, 2006. And then I simply was able to group these together and overlay from the text analysis itself common words used. And so this was this graph, Genesis custom built product commodity driven by supply and demand competition. And so you think about the Parthian battery, Hippolyte Pixie, Siemens generators, and then Tesla Westinghouse. Or you think about the Z3, Lions Electronic Office, IBM 650, rental services like TimShare, commodity hardware, cloud. And so that is what became movement. I literally just put that at the bottom. And that's where it came from. But it was literally hundreds of other axes It was an entire year
Mhm.
just to come up with those labels at the bottom. So occasionally people say, "Hey, I've had this great idea. We should change these labels to this." And it's like, well, when did you come up with that? Oh, I was sitting in a coffee shop. Have you got any evidence for this? No. Okay, well, come back after a year, after 9,000 publications or whatever, and the hell you have to go through to build some sort of evidence for it, and then we can talk. So the answer is there may well be better axes out there. I've used this for 20 years now. Um, I am very reluctant to spend another year going through this hell. It's good enough. I'm very keen for somebody else to find it.
I
Simon,
will
this is
try.
wonderful.
Cool.
Yeah.
We
Yeah, I was
we're not.
thinking just to. Oh, sorry. It's fine. You can
No,
go.
no, please
Yeah.
tell.
Yeah. No. Like what I was thinking. Like I think this is so much information. I need to digest it a bit before having any very wise words. But I was thinking maybe it's not so much about like it, I think it sounds like this one is perfect for this use case. I was thinking maybe there are other use cases which could have a similar pattern. But
So,
yeah. Mm.
so I'll have to hang on a second. Hang on. Interest tweets. Give me a moment. Because normally let's have a look. Right, a couple of things. Let me share my screen again. Can you see my screen?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we see a desktop.
Oh, right. Okay, perfect. Can you see cheat sheet?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. So at the very top, stage of evolution, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay. So x-axis, it depends on what types of capital I'm talking. Often I'll use Genesis custom product commodity. These other labels also come from that 9,223 publications. So data, we could use unmodeled, divergent, convergent, modeled. Practices, novel, emerging, good, and best. Knowledge, concept, hypothesis, theory, accepted. So what I will often do is mix. I will go Genesis as number one, then custom, emerging, number two, and then product, converging as number three, and then number four, I'll go commodity accepted. Underneath this, these are the list of characteristics that all that they share. So, you know, in your stage one evolution, it's undefined market, it's uncertain, it's chaotic, non-linear, domain of that crazy, different, confusing, exciting, surprising, dangerous. That's the user perception. So these are how the words change. Okay. So when I'm mapping out things like ethical values and cultural systems, I tend to go, you know, concept, emerging, converging, accepted. But actually, these days, I mean, Genesis concept is close enough. Um, and I use custom emerging, product converging, commodity, accepted. I find that good enough. Does that make sense?
Very much so. Thank you.
Pleasure.
But
Because
if
if you
you're
want to
talking
add
about
different words,
right,
then I don't know because all I know is this seems to work.
as we are
Thank you,
talking
Simon.
axis,
Pleasure.
so can you comment also on the other axis? So
The
on
y-axis, there is no
y-axis.
y-axis. So
I mean, if you talk about value chain, and it makes a lot of sense for business cases, but you say you map about everything. So how
even books. So let me hang on a second. Hang on a second. Um, do you mind us overrunning? Are we overrunning?
We are overrunning. I just put a message that we are going to enjoy the moment, but
Oh, we
let's
can
let's
continue overrunning. All right. Okay.
well, let's
Okay.
still not run forever. But this is wonderful, so I want to hear you out.
All right. So There's so okay, let me share a screen again. All right, let's talk about culture. Okay, so I used to read all these books many, many years ago, decade or so ago, actually 15 years ago on culture. And particularly people in business saying you should have this or that culture. And so I took a real interest in this and I went and looked into anthropology. So the anthropologists are the experts on culture. That's what they do. And this is my favorite quote from Kroeber. This is about 50 years ago. That despite a century of effort to define culture adequately, there is no agreement amongst anthropologists regarding its nature. So the experts on culture cannot determine what culture actually is. And yet, we write all these business books on what your culture should be. Love it. And then I came across the work of Margaret Mead. Margaret Mead was brilliant. She talked about language is a discipline of cultural behavior. And that creates a problem because if you define culture in terms of language, and if language is part of culture, then you hit Gödel's incompleteness theorem. So no system or model can be complete and true within itself. Okay. So I decided to map it. So I started looking at different collectives and thinking about, collective had values. They might have values like universal basic income, paid holiday, unionization. Okay. But those values don't exist in isolation. They're based upon other values, and sometimes we codify those values into laws. So anti-discrimination laws, workers' rights, civil rights, abolition of slavery, and that's based upon reciprocity and fairness. And of course, these aren't static. Though some of these values started off as Genesis concepts, they're emerging, then became converging and finally accepted. And of course, it's going to be different for different collectives. So I started out mapping values within different collectives. And then I crushed all the values down. So what I said is all of these values share a common meaning in the fact that they're a value. So what I'm going to do is collapse it all down and say we're going to have collective has values, and here are the high level ones: universal basic income, paid holidays, workers' rights. Okay. And so I'm going to simplify it to that. And I said, right, that's my map of culture. I'm pretty sure there's more to a map of culture than this, but that's where I'm going to start. And so in order to map it out, because mapping is best done with large groups of people, I decided to get two groups of people who could not agree with each other. And in the UK, it was really easy. So in 2016, I grabbed a bunch of Brexiteers and Remainers. And these people could not agree with each other in any shape or form. And I got them into a room and I showed them that map. And I said, can we flesh out this map of culture? Now, the thing is, they can't agree with each other in story form, but they can argue through the medium of a map. And so that's what they ended creating for me. So at the top of this map of culture is the concepts of we and me. Me is about individuality and agency. Agency means power, power over a collective. We is about control, again, power with the collective this time. And you've got a whole bunch of other components like principles, behaviors, memory, landscape, psychological, safety, senses of belonging. And there are various patterns in here. So, for example, with the collective, it needs to be successful in spreading its values. Okay. And those values underpin its behavior. They're not the only thing that underpins behavior. And our sense of safety comes from seeing others share the same behavior. That gives us a sense of belonging, which is where power of the collective comes from. And you can use this to stabilize or destabilize collectives. Now, I said behavior comes from not only values, but principles. So I said earlier, one of those principles is focus on user needs. If your value or your belief is everybody's equal, your behavior will be to focus on the needs of everyone. If you believe your value is that people with green eyes are more important than anybody else, you'll focus on the needs of people with green eyes. So the point about this is using the same principles, you can get very different behaviors depending upon the values. Those values are also embedded in memory, symbols, rituals, heroes, what we call art. Now, one of the biggest forms of art today is video games. Anybody know who this video game is by? Anybody know this video game? It's Holy Defense. Do you know who it's by, the gaming studio? Hezbollah. Hezbollah, that well-known AAA video gaming company. Okay. The point about this is we've used art, whether it's Hollywood, whether it's stories, whatever it happens to be, to manipulate the values and perceptions of others for an awfully long time. And video games are just simply the largest form of art today. Which is why they have an interest in this stuff, and it's why governments have an interest in this stuff. Do you know the story of Robin Hood?
We do.
Okay, so it's all about the lawman, the Sheriff of Nottingham, who's trying to make sure and uphold the law, and that evil thieving bastard Robin and his gang of murderous thugs stealing and robbing from people. Do you know that story?
But not in that perspective, no.
Not in that perspective. So what really matters is also how you tell the story. Now, you control the story if you control the tools, medium, and language.
Yeah.
So tools would be something like the printing press, the medium would be the written paper, the language would be the written word. If you control those, you control the story that's being said. Now, we didn't go through this. One of the most interesting thing about large language models today is what's actually changing is not only the tools, our coding environments, but the language from non-deterministic from deterministic to non-deterministic, plus also the medium itself. So moving from coders text to coders images. And the point about that, if that is captured by one or a small group of players, they control the ability for you to reason. This is why large language models are actually a non-kinetic form of warfare. They're a bit like Hollywood, just in case you don't know what I mean by that, it's when you are vibe coding, if you aren't looking at the code, which is, I suppose, goes back, Morton, to the point about why it's really important that everybody needs to review and test and see the code. That's probably where the connection comes from. When you are vibe coding, unbeknownst to you, probably, whatever values the large language model has been trained with, which are in its training data, are going to be imposed on whatever system it builds. And if you have any delusions of this, that, oh, no, it doesn't matter, correlation between GPT and humans and cultural distance from the United States spells it out. Okay. So the more and more these systems do the building for you, the more and more closely aligned you will become to those sort of Western values. And that's fine, but that's got to be a conscious choice. It may not be, you may not want to be, have those values embedded in everything that you do. And I've got an example of that in sovereignty, if you want to run for another 5 minutes.
It's okay. So actually, I have liberal time. I think
All
everybody
right.
manages their own time, and I appreciate the moment. So let's go.
Let's go. So one of the things I get dragged into is conversations about digital sovereignty. Because most of the conversations I hear on digital sovereignty are pretty much clueless. I mean, I hear all sorts of nonsense, such as it's really important where the data centers are built, that we have control. Total garbage, absolute garbage. Let's go through it. Territorial sovereignty is pretty easy because we've got maps. And so we go, right, here's our border. This is our society, our values, our behavior within it. This is our nation or our state or whatever it happens to be. If you cross our border, we're going to conflict with you unless we've given you permission. Outside, we may cooperate, collaborate, or cooperate. Okay? So we often talk about sovereignty in territorial spaces using a map. But what about economic and technological spaces? Well, here is a graph, not a map, of the automotive industry. Where should my borders be? I have no idea. But back in the DVLA, which is the Drivers and Vehicle Licensing Agency, back in 2015, we sat down and we mapped out that automotive industry. And then we applied those common economic patterns and forecast to 2025, which happens to be this year. And we basically looked at this map and said, like, more and more of the automotive industry is going to become a commodity. We're going to start seeing intelligent agents. We're probably going to get close to self-driving cars, all this sort of stuff. And how would car manufacturers attempt to differentiate? So the first thing we came up with in the DVLA is they'll probably do digital subscription models associated with design. And sure enough, 2018, I think it was either BMW or Mercedes, I don't quite know who, came up with this idea of you could have bottom warmers seats or whatever, heated seats, if you had a digital subscription, you know? Very cool, free, we didn't care though. We knew they'd come up with stupid things like that. What we cared about was this one, status to route management. Because what we realized is eventually, as we got self-driving cars, you'll have self-driving cars going along, and then Gold Member comes along. And of course, the market being the market and the manufacturers being the manufacturers would think it would be a really good idea if all the lower subscription cars moved out of the way so Gold Member gets to their meeting faster or whatever. And of course, what we've now done is embedded social inequality into the transportation system even more than it's been there before. And of course, our problem would be if we have a flood, that means none of the poor people are getting out, just the wealthy people are getting out. And of course, that means next day we have pitchforks revolution. And so government perspective, this is back in 2015. We knew that's just something we're going to have to care about. The market is full of a bunch of idiots who will think it's a great idea to do, Gold Member gets there faster. We know it's a bad idea. And so the other classic example of this was the trolley problem. So if you imagine a self-driving car, not a trolley coming along, and you can kill one person or 5 people, who do you kill? If that's your only choices. Well, hopefully you say you kill the one person. But what happens if the one person is a Gold Member? Well, hopefully, it depends on which society you are in. You still kill the one person. Maybe some societies will go, oh no, we protect the Gold Member. But the point about this, and going back to AI, is if that AI systems and you're in a vibe coding environment where you're not looking at the code anymore, are building the systems for you, then whatever values it is trained with are going to be, it's going to be making that decision for you. Okay? And this is why it's a sovereignty issue as well. And it's not about where your data centers are. It's about, and it's not even about how open the models are. It really is about how open the training data is. All of it's got to be open. All the symbolic instructions need to be open. Anyway, if you can't do that, your best bet then is not to sell sovereignty to one group, but to multiple groups at the same time. Anyway, that's another discussion. Does that make sense?
It does. And you
Good.
take
I'll
us
shut
through
up.
a lot of ground.
Oh,
Simon,
too much.
thank you.
Too much.
Thank you so much. Do you still have a little time? Can we ask if anybody has any questions or?
You can ask as many as you want.
Good. Any questions for Simon?
I only have a super quick another one. Like, I'm very interested more in your opinions on AI and those things. Is there a lecture somewhere I could watch where you have recorded or something?
There are any of the recent talks over the last couple of years, and there's loads of them online, will have me talking about large language models, GPTs. I'm not a big fan of the AI term because AI is, if you map it out, is an entire field. And of course, it's all getting consumed at this moment with large language models and GPTs. Um, there are some big issues about choices about how we think about architecture. So one of probably the most key architectural decision of today is to decide where humans matter in
Mhm.
decision-making processes.
Yeah.
And we're not very good at that. So hang on. Let me just yeah. All right. Very, very quickly. All right. Um, So whenever we discuss a problem in engineering, there are two mediums that discussion occurs on. One is the whiteboard, and one is the
Sorry to
screen.
interrupt. If you wanted to share something, we don't see it.
Oh, you know, shit. Oh, sorry. Okay. Let me try again. Can you see it now?
I mean, yeah.
Yes.
Yes, right. So whenever we talk about in an engineering department, we talk about a problem. There are two mediums which we discuss that problem on. One is the whiteboard, one is the screen. Now, on the whiteboard, we tend to talk about context, objects, and relationships between things. Where we discuss the same problem on a screen, we talk about syntax, styles, and rules. So one is more about the codification, one is more about the context itself. But it's the same problem, just we've been discussing it in two different mediums. And one of the ideas is that large language models, GPTs, replace the coder. And to the point that not just being an assistant, and I'm all for using a large language model GPTs as assistants, but to literally doing the code. So this idea that you just write the architectural diagram or the specification, and it will just build the system for you. And by the way, that's not a new idea. That comes from 2018, 2017. But we don't have time to go through that. So if I take a systems graph, um, we can talk about this as an architectural diagram. But the problem with this is when you actually look at a system, that's what a system really looks like. And in fact, this is 7 teams of people, 7 groups, build the same system with the same architectural diagrams with the same specification, using the same environments and the same tools. And you can see that they built very, very different things. These are all the different objects, the connections between objects and the data objects, and they're all very different. The architectures are very different, even though the architectural diagrams, specifications are the same, and they all pass the same tests, but they are very, very different solutions. And the point about this is the code is the architecture, which I think people sometimes forget. The architecture is not in the pretty diagrams we draw, it's in the code. So our architectural diagrams are nothing more than wishes, intents, beliefs, never have been. Okay, anything more than that. Same as specifications. The real architect and real decision maker is always the person writing the code. So when you decide to hand that over to a large language GPT model, well, that's fine. But what you're actually saying is they are the real decision maker and the real architect. Your architectural diagram specifications are no more than wishes. And so this then leads to probably what I think is the most important architectural question of our day, which is how much do you value human to be involved in decision making?
Mhm.
So if I'll take that HS2 map that I had earlier. If I look at that, I might go, well, some bits I'm going to outsource because I don't really care. Some bits I'm going to use vibe coding. I'm going to build prototypes with it. great, we'll get the machine to do it. If we decide we like something, then we might start rebuilding it, getting some engineers involved, using large language models as assistant to actually create it. In other places, we're going to use software development plus AI. Other places, I might use some autonomous agents because it's a well-known, well-defined enough problem. There are some agents trained on this, etc. But for me, this is the big, of all the questions and decisions. I mean, we've got issues about values and embedded values, but probably when it comes to use, I think probably the most challenging or most important architectural question of today is where do we value humans in the decision-making process? And I don't think people are doing that. Does that help?
Yes.
Definitely.
We should ask Björn.
Yes, it was very enlightening.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
And it really resonates. I wanted to just ask a few questions before we let each other go back to the theme. Is that okay?
Yeah, go for it.
I mean, of course, now we have an idea of what you mean with strategy and maps, etc. The question on the map is that is there in a given situation a map which is the better one? I mean, could you have, like, even if you don't know it, could you somehow ask yourself the question, is this the best map we have, or does that not make sense?
So I've got a group of people mapping out the space industry from many different perspectives. And the reason why you map out an industry from different perspectives is because if you imagine you send a group to map France or map Paris, right? You send a group to map Paris, and they come back with imagine no one's ever mapped Paris. And they come back with a map of Paris, and you say, what's the most important feature in Paris? They might go Pierre's Pizza Parlor because they've mapped Paris from a perspective of nice places to eat pizza. So what you actually do is you send multiple groups out to map from different perspectives. And then if you aggregate those perspectives, then you discover things like the Eiffel Tower because it appears in many different maps. Okay? So there's several things you do with a map. First, you realize all maps are imperfect representations of a space. So you can never create the perfect map. So what you do is you create a map with others and you constantly challenge the map and ask questions of the map. And as a result of doing this, you discover, it's not quite right. You make better maps and better maps. And you get to a sort of plateau that it's a good enough map. It helps us in the conversation. Okay. And the only other way of improving from there is to get multiple groups to map from multiple perspectives, and then you aggregate.
This is cool. So in some sense, it represents your best understanding in the moment until you learn that there is something better.
Because the knowledge you need is not in the head of one person. It's usually in the heads of many people. So which is why you provide a medium for doing this.
Yeah. So it helps building also, of course, then shared understanding.
Shared understanding, consensus.
Yeah. I'm expanding my horizon on strategy. And one thing that came up is that somehow you cannot understand a strategy without understanding your choice space. It's a word John Cutler used. But you want, of course, the idea of strategy to be actionable. Otherwise, there's no idea in it if you cannot act on it. Okay. But somehow you have a space in which you can act. And somehow there is a connection between the two. Okay. Does that make any sense at all?
Yeah. So the first thing is there is this idea that you have strategy and then you have execution. Okay.
That's not where I was going, but go on.
All right. Okay. As though they're separate things.
Yeah, exactly.
And the answer is they have never been separate things. That's just a bunch of strategy consultants wanting to be able to say, here's a strategy. Yeah. Oh, you failed to execute. The strategy was perfect. You just failed. All right. They are not separate things. No. The second thing is when you look at a map, I showed a map earlier where we had a map and I just draw, well, open source here, an ILC model here, constraints, all the space on a map are all the other options, all the other possibilities that could exist. Okay. Things being less evolved, becoming less evolved
Yeah.
is much
Yeah.
less likely. Things becoming
Mhm.
more evolved, highly likely.
Yeah.
So the space represents all the other options. And when you're actually
Yeah.
doing strategy, you're open
Mhm.
sourcing, you're
Yeah.
trying to drive parts
Yeah.
of the map
Yeah. Yeah.
into that space.
But also there are parts of that space which is more relevant with others. So you deliberately leave them empty because they might not have any relevance for your purpose.
Well, you will often find when you map, your maps get very complicated. Then you take things
Yeah.
off to simplify it,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
you don't throw away the other stuff. You just put it on another map or a sub
Yeah.
map. So you end
Good.
up with Atlas and then,
Yeah.
city maps, etc.
Yes. Yeah.
And then sometimes you bubble things up from the lower order maps because they really matter
Yeah.
at a particular point and gameplay
Yes.
at the
Yeah.
higher maps, and that's
Yeah.
perfectly fine.
Good. The final question is,
Yeah.
it's just for the poster on my wall. What is strategy?
What what is
15 seconds answer.
what is strategy? Strategy at the end of the day is how you maximize the landscape to achieve whatever purpose you're going for.
Yeah, perfect. You actually earlier said manipulate space to your favor.
Yes, how you manipulate the space to your favor, the
Yeah,
landscape to your
exactly.
favor.
Perfect. Thank you. Is there anything we can do for you, Simon? And really appreciate your time, and you took extra time for
Perfectly
that.
happy. It was nice to see you, or Uradev. I can still not say that properly. I will
Uradev.
eventually get Uradev. So eventually get there. It was great fun, really enjoyable. I hope you found that useful.
Indeed. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Yeah, it's
Bye.
been a pleasure. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.